without going into the details, we can discuss it if you want to. But what you can do, you've got a tremendously large population in Asia, admittedly poorly educated in large part, particularly the part we have to reach. But also the land is very poor. And when someone says, we don't want to invest in infrastructure, we want to put industries out there, just take them to the nearest loony bin, get them a canvas waistcoat with the ones that ties the arms behind or something, right? And just keep them out of the economics, because the first requirement of any industry, modern industry, is an adequate development of infrastructure. Transportation, ton miles per hour, that sort of thing, per square kilometer. Water, liters, per square kilometer per capita per household. Power, kilowatt hours. Energy flux density, same thing, for each mode of production you require. If these requirements are satisfied in the development of an area, then you have there, provided you have skilled labor, you have automatically, immediately the potential for successful investment if you have the right cadres to make it work. So the first thing you have to do is develop the infrastructure first. These ideas that you get, like the maquiladoras along the U.S. border with Mexico, are insane. You cannot build a successful, durable plant on top of a cesspool. You get diseases that way. And you get poor infrastructure. So therefore, then what you do as we did in the past. In every successful development of an industrial economy, beginning the United States itself during the 18th century and the 19th century, is the development of infrastructure, canals, ports, power facilities, rails, and so forth. These, and sanitation, and good urban organization, these were the preconditions of the successful industrial revolution and the successful agricultural revolution. The biggest factor in the American agricultural revolution of the post-war period was the rural electrification program, which was started under Roosevelt during the 1930s and continued through the 1940s. The availability of electricity, the improvement of transportation, and so forth and so on. Farms per hectare were greater consumers of steel when we were still farming in this country than most industries. When they began to liquidate the farm, they were ripping the steel out of the soil, pipeline, everything else. And you had the people who were doing the looting, like Cargill, the great grain cartel trust, which loots the farmers here and loots the farmers in Africa and so forth and so on, was out there and set up these melting down scrap. And the great part of the U.S. steel consumption today is derived from melting down the scrap of the economy, agricultural and industrial, we are destroying. We are like the man who's having a meal by eating his own left leg. All right, now on this. Let's go to the next one on this productive triangle program, the outline of the productive triangle. That's the, should be your 2003A. Huh? Perfect. Yeah, all right. Now, this is self-explanatory. What we did is we took the existing rail routes in Europe. Helga can describe this. She was involved in this heavily. And we proposed the new routes that had to be added. We did the same thing, next slide, with the water system. Defined the water systems. You see the difference between Western Europe and Russia. Now, what's your chances of competing in productivity with Western Europe in Russia or Eastern Europe today? You have a limited access, even though Russia has giant rivers. You have a limited access to development of the interior of the country. So without new canals, without new rail systems, it's impossible to develop Russia. It's impossible to solve the problems of Eastern Europe. And that's also more conspicuous when you get into Asia. Okay, next one. I think it's a combined one here now. Same thing. We have both the rail routes and the upgrades. And then the next one. Now, what we did is we divided Eurasia into these areas. You take Mongolia and China, with Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and so forth, as one unit. Because there are interrelations among these economies, natural interrelations, and therefore that's a planning unit. You have India and Southeast Asia, which are different the subcontinent, Southeast Asia, but essentially they also form a planning unit. You have the Middle East area, which of course is defined by Sudan, the largest country in there, and you have, of course, the Central Asian complex, which includes those indicated countries. Then, of course, the northern Siberia, which is largely the old Soviet area of Russia, and then Eastern and Western Europe. And those are the planning areas which we worked on. And we attacked, as you can see, we have a massive slides, but we're limiting today to do that. Now we have another series of slides on, this is on the Silk Route Railroad. I wanted to get to now, the Silk Route series. These indicate your routes. These are not necessarily precisely accurate. But the problem with the Silk Route is that it's an area of shifting sands and shifting lakes. And when you try to lay down rail on shifting sands and shifting lakes, you can get some problems. There are surveys that are done which determine the optimum route, even though the general idea of the route is obvious. The middle route, which you see there is the one below, is obvious. And then there's an indication, though it's not completely drawn on this map, that if you go from Kunming into this little area where Kun Shah, the drug lord bandit, is now operating in Burma, afresh now, you find there's an area which leads into my old area of Bamo and so forth, the Nishanah in Burma, that this rail route can lead across into Dhaka, into India, into Bangladesh, into India, and then across into Cairo. So there are these three routes. The obvious routes, and as indicated here, which is already the idea of Anatol and Vita, is to make from Siberia, north of Vladivostok, a rail jump to the islands, and to come down with a rail link into Japan itself. So Japan will be, by rail, linked into this Trans-Asian group. In addition to that, of course, this area is largely inland sea. One of the interesting features to comment on here is look at the island group down there. The most natural development of Indonesia will come from the development of waterborne transport. That whole area, the whole base area there, which we worked some years ago, is water. It's inland sea. We proposed to cut a canal, which was an old proposal, but I got involved in promoting it, through the isthmus in Thailand between the Gulf of Siam, so-called, and the Andaman Sea, which would bring India much more efficiently into this area, and to develop an integrated waterborne economy in that area. Anyway, so we have another one on the final on the existing rail. Okay, fine. How'd this get in here at this point? Oh well, that's a wrong one got in there. Okay, similarly, in addition to this, we have extensive proposals on North America, which center around particularly developing the eastern area which Teddy Roosevelt shut down. It would be interesting for you to check old maps and ask yourself how many new cities have been developed in the United States, apart from suburban mushrooms or whatever you call them, since 1911, or since Teddy Roosevelt became president. Find me and tell me how many new cities came into existence in the United States as functioning cities since Teddy Roosevelt became president. Virtually none. Now look at the western lands between the 20-inch rainfall line and into California. Show me how much development of this precious land area has been done. You got people out there in California, idiots, worrying about Proposition 187, about trying to kick the immigrants out. We've got a tremendous amount of land that needs to be developed right in that area, which is the Great American Desert and so forth. We have the water. We have the design for the project which will deliver the water where it's needed. We can solve these problems. We can take our poor youth off the streets who are killing each other and give them a future in a youth work program to assist in this kind of project. We can do that. We can build new power systems. We can rebuild this country. We can clean up the garbage and make it one we're proud of again. There are great opportunities also in Mexico. Mexico has projects which have never been scratched yet. And they're good projects. I've seen a number of them. They're sound. Colombia has great potential. Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Peru. We've done studies on all of these areas. Africa has tremendous potential. We studied these. The work to be done to bring humanity into the kind of condition which would have satisfied my dear friend Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa. There's much to be done. There's no want of employment. We can do with a lot fewer stockbrokers who only steal our pension funds and raid our corporations. But we do need skilled people, engineers, scientists, and skilled labor. We do need the opportunity to take the young children who are destroying each other with drugs and whatnot on the street and take them out and enable them to get a second chance to become real human beings with work and education and some caring and the prospect of hope. We can do that not only in the United States, we can do it in the world. And our proposal is, and I've just limbed over this and given some of the concepts which are essential within a time which is already, in a sense, too long, but I wanted to get the concepts across, the essential ones. And that's what we're doing. We know certain things, a lot of things we don't know, a lot of things we have yet to find out. But what we know, and it will work. Shall we say, I have seen the future, and it works. And it wasn't communist. Okay, thank you.
I think that even though technically I'm supposed to shut this session, we'll have half hour for questions, since we have a healthy crowd here. What about the microphone? Oh, there's a microphone back there for people to ask questions. It's right straight in back of me. Straight in the back of the room, right in front of me. So, while the conference will be proceeding for 2 more sessions, and we'll come back here in, I guess we probably should start the second session around 2. If we want to have some questions now for 20 minutes or so, I think that's,
okay.
If that's acceptable to the people who are running the time, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Please identify yourself.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Larry Ayong Echo. I'm a journalist from Cameroon. I want to thank Mr. LaRouche for his brilliant presentation, and I want to go straight to some of the concepts that he has raised, which are of concern to my own area, which is Africa. There are 3 main areas of discussion which I want him to, I want to provoke his reaction. They have to do with the nation state. They have to do with de Gaulle's legacy in Africa, and they have to do with Basil Davidson. Basil Davidson, a British writer. I want to go to the nation-state concept, which I think is very crucial to what Mr. LaRouche has been saying from all what I've read from him, and I think I've learned a lot for the past 3 months I've been here from his organization. What I come to realize every time I want to link his concepts to the very disastrous situation in Africa is that there is only one nation in Africa. All the trappings of artificially mounted conglomerations of tribes which have been patched together and are very hostile to each other are artificial creations of the British and the French. And whenever such hybrid structures have tried to subsist, they have been attacked from all angles, as we can see the example of Nigeria being hemmed in by the cordon sanitaire of Francophone African countries which are attacking it, and what is happening in Sudan. And when I go back to the antecedents of history in Africa, I realize that they are just the 2 colossuses, I don't know whether that's how it's said, the 2 giants of the African continent in terms of conceptualization in politics and economics, Cheikh Anta Diop from Senegal and Kwame Nkrumah, have always regarded the African nation state as one single entity. It's indivisible. It can exist only as one. And what has happened in Africa since the Second World War has been a British and Anglo-American and French conspiracy to destroy this African nation state and create artificial forms which have not been able to exist. And and it's responsible for what is happening in the continent today. So I want Mr. LaRouche to comment on that. I don't want to go ahead. Secondly, I said I'm sorry.
3 in 1, maybe.
Yes. Well, let me be brief now. Secondly, I'd like Mr. LaRouche to talk about Basil Davidson, who is turned 80 this week and is the most prolific publisher on Africa. He has 24 books. I want us to know what he thinks about him. Thank you. And about de Gaulle. His legacy in Africa is very disastrous. I want to know about that. Thank you.
On de Gaulle? Well, let me say my method, because I take a different approach to this. In geometry, and let's start, say, with a simple Euclidean geometry of the type that used to be reflected in classrooms. You start, when you educate children in mathematics, you do two things. You teach them construction in geometry, gives them a sense of freedom, but then you also give them a sense of formal geometry, because the learning of formal geometry is a way they can understand some of the non-formal geometry. And what they do is they're given a set of axioms and postulates. And in a good course, the child who's learning, usually we say about 10 to 12 years of age when you subject them to this process, the child learns that the proof in formal geometry is to prove that the method by which you construct one result coincides with the result of the method by which you construct another. The child learns that all theorems which are consistent with a fixed set of axioms and postulates can be defined by those axioms and postulates alone. That is, if you understand the axioms of the system, every theorem is implicit. Now, in the case of Africa, that's the point. First of all, there are certain axioms which must be satisfied. And whatever the people of Africa decide to do is their business. The issue on which I concentrate are the axioms, and I concentrate on the dangerous meddlers. Now, the problem is not, I think the one correction I would add is this. I don't know that much about Basil Davidson. I know something about him, but I wouldn't be qualified, I think, offhand to comment on it. I will say this, however. The traditional mistake, which is taught to Africans by British and French schools, is to accept the idea that the conflict between Africa, Europe, and the United States is a conflict among nations. It is not. The conflict is between those such as Prince Philip and the Club of the Isles, who are the enemies of the United States, the enemies of President Clinton, not of Bush. Those who are committing genocide in Africa, those who are organizing the game parks. I'm not concerned about the nation states. I'm concerned about the game parks, the game preserves. That's how Africa is being raped, with game preserves. That Prince Philip said he was going to save the panda. Well, we caught him with his pandas down in Tibet. He's killing them off. He said he was going to save the rhinoceros, and he almost wiped them out. And he hired the park managers kill the game and sell the product. They killed the elephants. Little kiddies spent their pennies to help Prince Philip save the elephant, and he killed the elephant. They gave their pennies, their devotion to save the rhinoceros, and he killed the rhinoceros. All he can do is get 2 imitation hippopotami climbing the mountain up there or something in Africa. The problem is the enemy. Look, read Ephesians. We are not up against men in the ordinary sense. We're up against principalities and powers. Huh? And the Club of the Isle and Prince Philip represent about as close to Satan as you can get in the normal flesh. Huh? These are principalities and powers which represent an oligarchy, like a parasite which is destroying mankind. We had in the Renaissance the most beautiful culture ever provided to mankind. And these swine ruined it. Prince Philip wasn't around then. He probably wishes he were. He'd like to have done a little bit more of the killing himself. But these are the problems. So what we need is a set of axioms, a set of principles which guide us, and let the people of each region choose their own design of nation state. But let us agree to defend the people in their existing nation states against the atrocities being perpetrated against them. And at their leisure, let them consider if they wish to change these borders or compose different nation states. Now, when you talk about black Africa, sub-Saharan Africa as being one nation, well, I think Nkrumah was exaggerating a bit. I think brotherhood, the principle of brotherhood throughout Africa is very good. But he was exaggerating, because I know something about Africa. I'm not completely versed, but I do know something about it. And there are different regions, there are conflicts, there are all kinds of reasons why people would prefer to have a government, a local nation-state government. But let us establish certain moral principles, certain moral axioms, and say that whatever the people choose to do, which is consistent with those axioms, we are obliged to support them in doing. And that's the way I would approach it. So I don't deal with the nation-state thing. I know what you're talking about, but I don't get into it. When somebody tries to break up Nigeria, I may get my old musket out. Right? Because I'm not going to let somebody from London come and destroy Nigeria. That's the business of Nigerian people, not the Royal Dutch Shell. Right? Or not Abiola, who gave us the Museveni, who was a British puppet, who committed genocide in Rwanda, who knows what he did in Uganda, and who ran the war in southern Sudan trying to destroy Sudan. So Abiola's no good. So somebody sending Abiola to destroy Nigeria, I don't care what election he won. He's no good. He shouldn't be there. Shouldn't receive any support from the United States government. So people who actually, according to axiom, wish to help their nation and their neighbor's nation develop in Africa, according to certain principles which are morally acceptable to me, I support them in their right to do that. And if they want to talk about realigning the borders, I say, fine, discuss it. I'll be happy to sit in if you want me to. But it's not my business. My business is the principles. My business is to get the message out and get the help to get the people of Africa freed from the greatest abomination which I believe is now going on this planet.
I'm Marty Jewell, President of Richmond Crusade for Voters, Richmond, Virginia. My question, or two, quite related to the questioner and the answer previously. One, we had a governor, first and only black governor in the United States, Governor Wilder, who convened a conference of 26 African nations in 1992, in which there was struck a working paper, an agreement, basically specifying or indicating a willingness among those groups to do direct trade with America and cut out that devil's triangle to Western Europe, which typically creates a huge destabilization as it trickles back through that economy and destabilizes their governments. The willingness, therefore, on the part of Africa to have this relationship direct suggests to me that if we attack infrastructure building at the point of least resistance and address geopolitics from the point of least resistance, why then are we looking at focusing on Europe infrastructure, economic development versus African first? That's my first question. Secondly, your treatise was wonderful. I've heard it this summer, and this sort of adds to my understanding, although I've got a long way to go. But after this past election, particularly in Virginia, where we had this neo-fascist called Oliver North, and when we had the LaRouche group doing a tremendous job in getting the word out as to who this buzzard is, and after an enormous success on the part of the Democratic Party, in spite of all those dangers, you still have those same powers who find it difficult to embrace the ideas coming from this group. Won't even be associated with this group, scared to death of this group. How in God's name then do we establish a multiplier effect from this room, the notions and the premises that are absolutely germane to salvation? How do we get that word out in such a way that it can be timely and effective?
Well, you know, there's a pulsation in the course of history. And the problem that people have in understanding history is they don't start from history, and they start from their own personal experience and try to get personal satisfaction within their lifetime, preferably when they're young. It's like the fellow says he wants to get rich before he's 25 years of age. And that has various kinds of expressions in life. What you have to do is you have to say what needs to be done and what am I obliged to do. It's like you say in Christianity, what's my cup, my Gethsemane cup? I'm prepared to drink it. Just tell me what it is. And do it. Now, in the case of North, we knew when we went out to destroy North, we knew what he was. We knew he was a very evil person. He's a degenerate, I would say, is the fair term for him. I know his background very well. And we knew that he was a cat's paw for something bigger and nastier. So we concentrated our forces, which were limited, on destroying this. And what we did is we went in there when everybody said it couldn't be done. We called him a son of a bush because he was, and because we didn't call him a buzzard because we thought the buzzards might have a good libel case against us, and we did. So what we did is we tripped him up. And we tripped him up by persistent, hard work, just telling the truth over and over again. And when he fell to the ground a couple of times, then all the courageous people from Washington came in and kicked him in the head, which is usually the way these things happen. So we are now dedicated, and as I reflected earlier, I didn't want to get into that too much here, but just to situate the problem, we're now dedicated to destroying the fascist movement which has temporarily taken residence in the nation's Congress, with the idea that in 1996, that thing is going to somehow go into the ash bin of history. We're going to get rid of it. What we're doing is the same thing we did with North, but it's a more sophisticated operation. For the next 18 months, we will saturate the United States with explaining exactly what's going on. Pamphlets, millions of pamphlets, which will go out through people the same way we're distributing other things around this country, on the question of the education, what privatization of education is, what OBE is, how they're trying to rip off your Social Security, why the proposals of North and Company in Virginia, and Henry Hudson in Virginia, and Voinovich in Ohio, are exactly the proposals that the Nazis carried out when they constructed Auschwitz in Poland. A private company is contracted, like the corporation which Voinovich is associated with in Tennessee. They're contracted to come in and invited to build a firm to use slave labor called prison labor. They will build a private custodial facility. Now, how this happened, for example, in Germany, 1933, 1934, the Nazis began filling up the prisons. Now, as you may recall, a depression was going on, and so somebody raised, how are you going to pay to hold all these prisoners for so long in these prisons, particularly with indefinite sentences? Well, they said, we're going to do it the Quaker way. The Quakers had established work camps in Germany earlier. So the Nazis said, we'll just put barbed wire around the Quaker work camps, and we'll stuff the prisoners in there, and they'll work as slaves. Auschwitz is the model for what this legislation is that's coming through on private prisons. August von Knerium, the head of IG Farben, a partner of the Rockefellers and Royal Dutch Shell, well known to people in Nigeria. Royal Dutch Shell's crowd built through Ige Farben, Auschwitz, the workplace. August von Canarium from Ige Farben, a partner of Royal Dutch Shell, also designated the camp Auschwitz to be maintained by the SS to provide the slaves. The slaves went to Auschwitz camp. They were classified as useless eaters, as able-bodied or skilled. The able-bodied people went to work for Ige Farben. They were protected by private guards. They slept in the collar and slop. They got a soup which is about 1,100 calories a day to 1,200 calories a day. Their bodies consumed in labor and just living about 3,500 calories a day. After 3 months, an able-bodied slave was turned into a human skeleton. The factory manager would fill out a slip to replace worn-out parts for replacement parts. The Gestapo, the SS, would come and collect the skeletons, throw them in with useless eaters, and let them share their diseases and let the dying carry out and burn the dead, bury the dead. Then they made it more efficient. They let to burn them alive, to get rid of the body. That's what they did. And that's exactly what it reads like in the language of the proposals for private prisons in the United States, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and in other parts of the country. Slave labor, like the Nazis. There is no difference between George Voinovich of Ohio and Adolf Hitler when it comes to concentration camps and private prisons. Same proposal. The reason Hitler didn't kill the Jews right off is he said, we make too much money out of their slave labor. We'll exhaust them to death until they can't work anymore, and then we'll let them die of diseases. And it's only when they thought they were going to lose the war they began burning the bodies to get rid of some of the evidence. That kind of stuff. That's what these guys, we're going to expose that. We're going to expose the capital gain. What are they going to do? What's the capital gains ripoff? Capital gain is a low tax you pay for earning lucky money. Gambling money, which you get by stealing people's pensions through derivatives. Now, most people who have middle income will pay 33 to 40% on taxes, aggregate taxes, in most parts of the country. Why should a man who goes out to work, or a woman who goes out to work, with a middle income, supporting a family, have to pay 40% tax on their revenue, when a thief who didn't earn anything, who just won it on the Wall Street derivative casino, stealing it from your pension fund, why should he get it for 15% taxes? And who are the people behind who are funding these conservatives? These are the people who will make the bonanza on the capital gains ripoff. So you've got, this used to be called corruption. Yeah, I call it more burglary. Now, why should the American people continue to vote for a bunch of burglars? What free trade means they come in and steal what's in your house. So this kind of campaign, there's a pulsation in history. The American people, 80% approximately of the people of the United States, businessmen, farmers, everything, are being destroyed by these vultures. What they have to do is understand they're being destroyed. And you can't go up with one conversation to them and win them over or not win them over. What you have to do is you have to stand out there, keep the stuff going, go for 18 months, keep educating. The people who catch on will spread the word to the others. And in a time of crisis when people are looking for answers, when they're giving up, remember that the Republican Party is going to split. People who are half human or fully human, like Dole, are not going to live with Newt Gingrich forever. People in the Democratic Party who are serious about the country and serious about constituency are not going to keep up with these fruitcakes who want to destroy the country with their forever. What we must weld in this country is a new constituency or a new set of constituencies of people who understand that we as constituencies are not special interests competing with each other. We are people who do have interests, but we recognize we have more fundamentally a common interest in justice. And if we unite together to say we demand rational and just solutions to real problems, And we'll fight that out, and that's what we mean. I think that in this coming 18 months, we have a great opportunity in this crisis to begin mobilizing American people around the idea of the economics and the policy making of justice in a time of crisis.
Still, my first excellent answer. I just need some response on the first question. Point of least resistance. Why not Africa versus Europe first?
It's not a trade-off. The point is, if you want to develop Africa, you've got to do it from Europe. I'll give you an example. Let's take the case when the French and the British were fooling around with the UN. In the Rwanda case, what they did was garbage. They were killing people. What you do not do is to ship bottled water or Pepsi-Cola to starving Africans. Because when they run out of the last Pepsi-Cola bottle, what are they going to have to drink? What you do, as the U.S. Army did, and as the Germans did, the U.S. Army went in and put in water. The Germans went in and put in medical facilities. They did something to enable the people in that area to survive. They built them a system which would keep them alive. And it is not that expensive. In Africa, on the average, nickels and dimes of aid, if delivered to infrastructure, can save many lives. If you start creating these places like these food things and get people migrating along treks to get to the food, you're going to kill them. What you have to do is bring the development to them. What does it mean in Africa? What about fresh water, potable water that's not diseased? What about the simple medication which costs pennies to treat cholera? Otherwise the baby dies within a couple of days. These things are so urgent that there's no question about their absolute priority. But when it comes to development, what are we talking about? We're talking about railroads. Where do you get the steel mills in Africa to build railroads? You don't have them. Where do you have the water systems? We don't have them. The only entrepot we have in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, is in South Africa. And somebody wants to kill Mandela and blow that place up into a bloody show. Then where are you? So what we need is cooperation from all nations participating in the development of Africa. First of all, attend to these urgent needs which cost so damn little, but can save millions of lives, can give hope, the fact that somebody cares. We have an epidemic of HIV in Africa, which can, as in Uganda and other parts of Africa, can remove entire nations from the political map with disease. We have to do things about that. So there's no conflict. It's not a matter of trade-off. What's your first priority? The priority for Africa on certain things is absolute. And there's no conflict between doing that and do something else. But the conflict is between, are we going to keep that jerk selling stock in the stock market, or are we going to put him out and make him do some honest work? Then we'll have enough to do it.
I think we're losing people because they're hungry. So I think that we will break at this point, and we're scheduled to reconvene at 2, the presentation by Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and there'll be further discussion after that point. Thank you very much.
Now, what we did is we divided Eurasia into these areas. We take Mongolia and China, with Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and so forth, as one unit. Because there are interrelations among these economies, natural interrelations, and therefore that's a planning unit. You have India and Southeast Asia, which are different, the subcontinent, Southeast Asia, but essentially they also form a planning unit. You have the Middle East area, which of course is defined by Sudan, the largest country in there, and you have, of course, the Central Asian complex, which includes those indicated countries. Then, of course, the northern Siberia, which is largely the old Soviet area of Russia, and then Eastern and Western Europe. And those are the planning areas which we worked on. And we attacked, as you can see, we have a mass of slides, but we're limiting today to do that. Now we have another series of slides on, this is on the Silk Route Railroad. I wanted to get to now, the Silk Route series. These indicate your routes. These are not necessarily precisely accurate. But the problem with the Silk Route is that it's an area of shifting sands and shifting lakes. And when you try to lay down rail on shifting sands and shifting lakes, you can get some problems. There are surveys that are done which determine the optimum route, even though the general idea of the route is obvious. The middle route, which you see there is the one below, is obvious. And then there's an indication, though it's not completely drawn on this map, that if you go from Kunming into this little area where Kun Shah, the drug lord bandit, is now operating in Burma, afresh now, you find there's an area which leads into my old area of Bamo and so forth, the Nishana in Burma, that this rail route can lead across into Dhaka, into India, into Bangladesh, into India, and then across into Cairo. So there are these three routes. The obvious routes, and as indicated here, which is already the idea of Anatol and Vita, is to make from Siberia, north of Vladivostok, a rail jump to the islands, and to come down with a rail link into Japan itself. So Japan will be by rail linked into this Trans-Asian group. In addition to that, of course, this area is largely inland sea. One of the interesting features to comment on here is look at the island group down there. The most natural development of Indonesia will come from the development of waterborne transport. That whole area, the whole base area there, which we worked some years ago, is water. It's inland sea. We proposed to cut a canal, which was an old proposal, but I got involved in promoting it, through the isthmus in Thailand between the Gulf of Siam, so-called, and the Andaman Sea, which would bring India much. Without going into the details, we can discuss it if you want to. But what you can do, you've got a tremendously large population in Asia, admittedly poorly educated in large part, particularly the part we have to reach. But also the land is very poor. And when someone says, we don't want to invest in infrastructure, we want to put industries out there, just take them to the nearest loony bin, get them a canvas waistcoat with the ones that ties the arms behind or something, right? And just keep them out of the economics, because the first requirement of any industry, modern industry, is an adequate development of infrastructure. Transportation, ton miles per hour, that sort of thing, per square kilometer. Water, liters, per square kilometer per capita per household. Power, kilowatt hours. Energy flux density, same thing, for each mode of production you require. If these requirements are satisfied in the development of an area, then you have there, provided you have skilled labor, you have automatically, immediately the potential for successful investment if you have the right cadres to make it work. So the first thing you have to do is develop the infrastructure first. These ideas that you get, like the maquiladoras along the U.S. border with Mexico, are insane. You cannot build a successful, durable plant on top of a cesspool. You get diseases that way. And you get poor infrastructure. So therefore, then you use what you do as we did in the past. In every successful development of an industrial economy, beginning in the United States itself during the 18th century and the 19th century, is the development of infrastructure, canals, ports, power facilities, rails, and so forth, these, and sanitation, and good urban organization. These were the preconditions of the successful industrial revolution and the successful agricultural revolution. The biggest factor in the American agricultural revolution of the post-war period was the rural electrification program, which was started under Roosevelt during the 1930s and continued through the 1940s. The availability of electricity, the improvement of transportation, and so forth and so on. Farms per hectare were greater consumers of steel when we were still farming in this country than most industries. When they began to liquidate the farm, they were ripping the steel out of the soil, pipeline, everything else. And you had the people who were doing the looting, like Cargill, the great grain cartel trust, which loots the farmers here and loots the farmers in Africa and so forth and so on, was out there and set up these melting down scrap. And the great part of the U.S. steel consumption today is derived from melting down the scrap of the economy, agricultural and industrial, we are destroying. We are like the man who's having a meal by eating his own left leg. All right, now on this. Let's go to the next one on this productive triangle program, the outline of the productive triangle. That's the, should be your 2003A, huh? Pardon me. Yeah, all right. Now, this is self-explanatory. What we did is we took the existing rail routes in Europe. Helga can discuss this. She was involved in this heavily. And we proposed the new routes that had to be added. We did the same thing, next slide, with the water system. Define the water systems. You see the difference between Western Europe and Russia. Now, what's your chances of competing in productivity with Western Europe in Russia or Eastern Europe today? You have a limited access, even though Russia has giant rivers. You have a limited access to development of the interior of the country. So without new canals, without new rail systems, it's impossible to develop Russia. It's impossible to solve the problems of Eastern Europe. And that's also more conspicuous when you get into Asia. Okay, next one. I think it's a combined one here now. Same thing. We have both the rail routes and the upgrades. And then the next one.